we were all like one big family. You know, we're like a traveling carnival that went down the road every month, and a lot of us kind of grew up together in the sport.
Welcome to the Woman Angler and Adventurer podcast, inspiring real women with a passion for fishing and the outdoors to go get their adventure on. Now, here's your fearless host, Angie Scott.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Woman Angler and Adventurer podcast. Y'all are in for a real treat this week. If you aren't familiar with my guest, Angie Thompson, I'm so excited to introduce her to y'all. Angie has had a long career in the fishing industry, and with that experience, she now hosts an amazing podcast for anyone interested in a career in the business. It's helpful for any anglers out there looking to market and grow their brand and get sponsors. It's also a great show for anyone who's just a fan of the sport to learn about all the ins and outs of the business side of fishing. It's called the Fishing Business Podcast, and it's so well done. Before we get into that conversation, I always like to give you a quick update on things going on behind the scenes. So this week, we're picking up the Lance Truck Camper Mobile Podcast Studio. I've got the new lithium batteries, and we're going to work on getting that conversion taken care of. But unfortunately, we're not going to be bringing it on the road with us to North Carolina. As I mentioned before, I learned a valuable lesson about making reservations with the current state of how crazy camping is these days after COVID. You definitely have to get those reservations in as soon as tournament schedules are released. And so we are taking it to the next one, which is Cane River. But going forward, I said this before, but I feel like 2021 is just a learning and growing year and getting things set up for 2022. So we are hitting the road with the Key West for the next big tournament on Lake Hickory in North Carolina. And before we get on the road, I'm really excited about this. I locked in a full day electronics course on the new boat with a local guide to learn all the ins and outs of the Garmin units, as well as the live scope to help me catch more bass. So I'll be sure to keep you posted on that and let you know how it goes. Next week might be a shorter episode than usual, as it's going to be time to focus on the tournament, but rest assured it's going to be another good one. So, all right, please help me welcome Angie Thompson from the Fishing Business Podcast to the show and enjoy. Angie Thompson, welcome to the Woman Angler and Adventurer podcast. This is the first time I've had another Angie on the show. So,
oh, right. Well, thank you so much for having me. I have been wondering when I might get an invitation. No, I'm kidding, but I have. But thank you so much for inviting me to be here today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I love what you've been doing. You're also a podcaster now, and you have a great podcast called the Fishing Business Podcast, so I definitely want to talk about that. But let's back it up just a little bit before we get into that, because you are one that I think if anyone in the fishing business should have a podcast called the Fishing Business Podcast, you may be one of the most perfect people to do that.
Yeah, I've had a really long history in the fishing industry. I've basically worked in it for my entire career. And I started as a graphic designer. I've studied art in college and never dreamed I would end up working in the fishing industry. But I grew up fishing with my dad. And so I was really comfortable in this space. And I started as a graphic designer, started working in television production, working for production company that did programming for ESPN. And actually, what we really did was we took care of the whole outdoor category for the network, because the guys from ESPN, they were all stick and bill sports guys, and they didn't really understand the the audience the way we did.
Mm-hmm.
And so they kind of said, hey, take care of this whole category for us. We had producers all around the country that would send us in their shows, and then there used to be a Saturday morning block on ESPN called ESPN Outdoors. It was 4 hours of programming, and then when ESPN2 launched, we launched an additional 4 hours of programming on ESPN2 on Sunday mornings. And so we had a ton of content that was coming out of our studios in Little Rock, Arkansas for a lot of years.
Now, did you cover like hunting as well and all that stuff?
Well, so the way our production company worked, we coordinated the entire outdoor block for the network, and then we produced shows within that 4 hour block. We did not. I produced a hunting show for a couple of seasons, but that wasn't really our company's wheelhouse.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we did a lot of hunting related stories, but we weren't really doing hunting shows per se, but
Mm-hmm.
we were coordinating with other people who that was their strong suit.
Gotcha. And did you like cover all around the country, or were you?
Oh, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we also did these interstitials, which means Tommy Sanders was the host. He came on between each show and said what was coming up next and what would be up in the next hour. It was all a way to keep the audience there and try to get them to not change the channel. And then when we launched on ESPN2, I was actually one of the interstitial hosts along with Tommy Sanders and a guy named Craig O'Neill. But our goal for that from the network was, to go to the prettiest and most interesting places in the outdoors in the country. And so for 15 years, we traveled to all the greatest places.
Wow.
And it was a great gig. It really was.
What a great life for somebody who's loves being in the outdoors. I can't
absolutely
think of something more perfect than that.
No, right. I agree 100%.
Very cool. So you did that, and I imagine you get to, I'm from Minnesota originally, so walleye fishing up in Minnesota and
oh yeah. Well, and also we went to the Quetico and smallmouth fish, which is of course up around north of Ely, and it's a Canadian provincial park. I'm sure you're familiar with it. But I did a week one time on the Voyageurs National Park in a houseboat doing gathering fishing content, which was really fun. I've done so much in Minnesota. Really, I mean, I love Minnesota. I love visiting there. The people are so nice. When they say Minnesota nice, growing up from Alabama, I didn't really know what that meant, and I didn't know very many people from Minnesota.
Right.
And but after meeting a lot of friends from Minnesota, I'm like, oh my gosh, they may have us beat down there. Our Southern hospitality may be beat by Minnesota nice. I think we should have a contest.
There you go.
Who wins, Minnesota nice or Southern hospitality?
Did you do any ice fishing?
I have done ice fishing. In fact, you'll love this, Angie. I had never been on camera before, and I was just producing and directing, and we had launched ESPN2. We had the network said, go out and produce some programming where large groups of young people fish together, and we did this series, and one was a party boat in Key West, and we had it all planned out. One was like a float trip down a river, and one was ice fishing, but it was not in Minnesota, it was in Indiana. And the first one we shot was in Indiana because it was in the winter, and I went up as part of the crew, but when we got there was a big group of people, but there were no women. And so the producer said, hey, Angie, why don't you jump in the scene? Because we want to make sure that, women, we show that there are women like this too. And so I jumped in and I'm fishing with these guys that I've never met before, but they were great. And I was like, listen, I'm from South Alabama. I've never even seen a pond that you could stand on. And so this is all really new to me. And at certain times during the day, Angie, I said, when is this going to start getting fun?
So you were just out there in the open. You didn't have any shacks.
Yeah, no, we weren't in
anything.
huts or anything like that. But then they broke out some wine that they had made, a homemade wine, and it did get fun. But there were also times when I was just like, it's too cold, or, I was very, very honest and direct about what I was feeling. Well, the network saw that and they were like, this is a different perspective, because this is a woman who is saying what a lot of people won't say on TV. They won't point out the obvious sometimes because they want everything to be, great and the best. And, and it was refreshing to hear. They said it was refreshing to hear somebody say, when is this going to get fun? And so that's what launched my on-camera career. And then I actually ended up with a 30-minute show of my own called Cumberland Stories for several years on ESPN.
Very cool.
So Minnesota and ice fishing was all tied into that.
Yep, gotcha. I had watched a little clip on one of your websites, and I think your Ron Shera was mentioned.
Oh, yeah.
And talking about dogs.
Ron, what a good friend. I love Ron. Ron and Raven.
Yep, grew up watching their little clips on our new local news. So
yeah, on KARE, is that what it is? K11? Yep,
that's
right. Yep, I remember that. Ron's a very good friend. I have a lot of admiration and respect for him. What a great job he did. Wonderful writer, great on camera, and loves dogs. I mean, you can't get much better than that.
Great storyteller, of course.
Yes.
Well, and so you did that for a while, and then ended up at BASS through your company.
Yep.
And I had no idea. This is so funny. You're probably going to laugh at this, but I never really even stopped to think what BASS stood for. I just always assumed it just meant bass. So I saw on your website, Bass Angler Sportsman Society. I just literally have never even
Isn't that
wondered.
Like an old-timey Southern?
It so is.
I love it. I've always loved it. I actually had when we were part of the group that bought Bass. I actually had a stamp made that you could stamp your your papers with that said Bass Angler Sportsman Society, because it's so retro and old-timey. But I just loved it. So yeah, I the owner of our company, Jerry McKinnis, was one of the owners that bought BASS from ESPN. So it was originally founded by Ray Scott. Ray Scott sold it to an investor group that was headed up by a woman named Helen Sevier. Helen sold it in around, I want to say it was around 2001. Helen sold it to ESPN. And then ESPN owned it for 10 years. And then they sold it to Jerry McKinnis and Don Logan. And that's when I began to work for Bass. It was sort of like it was sort of like the Wild Wild West. Everybody was trying to figure out who did what well and who would fit in the right place. And so I did a whole bunch of different little things, and then kind of wound up in sales and sponsorships.
Gotcha.
So,
huge part of the fishing industry, especially these days.
And I took care of and brought in some non-endemic clients. Toyota was my client, Carhartt was my client, GoPro, Pepsi, Anheuser-Busch, and as well as some fishing clients too. But I think I had these great relationships with these non-endemic sponsors, and I think it was because as with my background in storytelling and visual arts and being a TV producer, I could help them tell stories authentically in our space and be relevant and authentic. Authenticity is so important, and especially for these brands that are not, they're not Strike King, or they're not Pure Fishing, or they're non-endemic brands, because our audience, people who like the outdoors and like to fish, are very discerning, and they can spot a faker from a mile away. And so I really tried to make sure those brands, when they came into the sport, as I said, they were relevant and authentic, but not fake.
Right. Well, that's so important, like you said, and so you must have been just a really huge asset for those brands, I'm sure. So that's awesome.
Well, I tell you what, it was a real blessing to get to work with some of those brands. I worked with some really, really smart marketers, some of the best marketers in the world, and I learned so much from them. And they were always so respectful of fishing, and they never demeaned it. They never talked down about it. They were extremely, extremely respectful of fishing and the Bass brand.
From billion-dollar ad budgets and arena naming rights to tens of thousands of retail locations, big wireless providers spend big to appear like they're your only option. How do they afford it all? That big bill you get at the end of every month. Mint Mobile had a different idea. Instead of brick and mortar overhead, Mint Mobile is online only. What does that mean for you? A whole lot of savings, because wireless plans from Mint Mobile start at just $15 a month. That's unlimited talk, text, and data for just $15 a month. You'll save enough that you can get a brand new rod and reel for the upcoming season. For anyone who just hates their phone bill, Mint Mobile offers premium wireless for just $15 a month. All plans come with unlimited talk, text, and high-speed data delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. You can use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan, and you can even keep your same phone number along with all of your existing contacts. By going online only and eliminating traditional costs of retail, Mint Mobile passes significant savings on to you. Switch to Mint Mobile and get premium wireless service starting at just $15 a month. To get your new wireless plan for just $15 a month and get the plan shipped to your door for free, go to mintmobile.com/waypoint. That's mintmobile.com/waypoint. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/waypoint.
And then over the years, you've also helped mentor, it sounds like, a lot of the pro anglers.
I have. We did a lot. It's funny. We were trying to make our programming better. And in order to make our content better, we were trying to make our anglers better. And I did spend a lot of time with a lot of anglers, helping them, improve their on-camera presence and how they presented themselves on camera and on stage, and those were and mostly because, Angie, we were all like one big family. We're like a traveling carnival that went down the road every month, and a lot of us kind of grew up together in the sport, and so it was. I felt like they were my brothers and sisters, and I really did feel like, so close to these people personally. And I wanted great things for them. I wanted our pros to have the same accolades that pro athletes in other sports got. And so, I would do anything to help them get to that point,
That's so needed in the fishing industry. I've always said, because I came from the music industry, and the company that I work for is a booking agency, so we book concerts, and they are actually just an overall talent agency, but also became the biggest sports agency. And I always thought, why isn't there agents to represent these pro anglers? Because there's so much to learn as far as acquiring sponsors and
right
all these
well, a lot over the years, a lot of people have said to me, why don't you become an agent? You'd be really good at it. But I think the way this industry runs right now is it's so based on relationships, and our athlete endorsement deals are so different from other professional sports, because the brands are so the anglers are so tied in with the brands that they become part of the brand's identity, and that comes from relationships and nurturing relationships over years. And so it's there's no real right now. I don't feel like there's a lot of space for an agent to get in between that. What really makes those relationships work is the one-on-one between the brand and the angler, and to try to put an agent in the middle of it, it doesn't seem to work yet. Maybe one day.
That makes sense. And so I definitely want to talk about, we're just like, you have such a long career and there's so much that we could jump into, but I love that you started this fishing business podcast. I've listened to all the beginning episodes, and we talked offline a little bit. I've kind of not been in the car where I listen to podcasts for the most part, but I need to catch up. But what led you to start that? And then you've also got this fishing business school as well as part of that I want to touch on.
Right. So I resigned from my job at Bass back in the fall of 2019 to start just to no, and I just loved my job and I loved everybody there. And I didn't. There was it was very difficult for me to leave, but I had some other things that I was pursuing that I just couldn't do all of it, and then life is funny and life takes different turns, and what my expectations about how that the next couple of years were going to go did not come through. It changed dramatically, I'll say that. And so I had to take some time to figure out what I wanted to do for my next chapter. And as I was trying to figure that out, what was going through my head was I know so much about the business of fishing, and there are so many young people coming into the sport that don't. And I spoke to a group at Auburn University a couple of weeks ago, and they weren't the fishing team. They weren't even affiliated with. They were in the forestry school actually, but I realized that most of the people that are drawn to be on the fishing team in college and high school, they're not taking a ton of business classes. Some are, and they're smart to do that, but a lot of them aren't taking a ton of business classes. And what I was hearing from my friends in the marketing world at the brand level was that they were getting all these solicitations from high school and college anglers, and my friends would say, Angie, they don't even they don't realize, they don't know how to approach us, and they need some help they don't even understand the business cycle of when we plan our budgets and how a marketing budget works. So I thought, this fishing industry has been so good to me and has just given me the most incredible adventures and wonderful life. And I kind of owe something back. So I will start this podcast to target focusing on college and high school anglers, teaching them the business of fishing. Well, the funny thing about it is, Angie, I think so many of the people I hear from who listen to the podcast are not college and high school anglers. They're people of all ages who have this dream that they could somehow become a professional angler, become sort of some kind of social media influencer in the fishing space, or get a fishing job in the fishing industry. And they're the ones, it's shocking, how many of those listeners there are out there. I had no idea there were that many people who wanted to be part of this industry.
Yeah, and it's funny. I don't know if you know this or not, but when I first started this podcast, it wasn't called the Woman Angler and Adventurer podcast. It was called It Pays to Fish. And
interesting.
And my premise was to feature people in the fishing industry making a living in it in all different aspects. So you typically think of your tournament anglers and maybe your guides,
Sure.
And sure, that's part of it, but I wanted to explore who else is in the fishing industry making a living, doing something related. And so I interviewed Casey Scott, who's one of the artists with Hook Gear. He was one of my early on. I had Troy Lindner on the show from Lindner Media and, television personality. And, just Darren Edmondson from Fish Donkey created the Fish Donkey app as an alternative for weigh-ins and stuff. So it's funny. And then early on, I had Barb Carey on, who runs this group up in Wisconsin called Wisconsin Women Fish, and that's what got the wheels turning for me to focus on women in fishing, because I was like, there's not really anything out there. So I'm so glad that you came along and picked up the business side, and you know so much more about it and are so much more qualified than I am to cover that topic. So
well, but you know what, Angie? Thank you for saying that, and that's so interesting that you started at that doing that. But you don't really have to be an expert, to at something to produce good content on that subject. Sometimes it helps if you're not, So I say that in just saying, I'm sure your podcast was great, even when it was about business, even if you think you didn't know as much about it as maybe some other people did. But I'm so glad that you're doing that you're highlighting women. It's been so interesting to me to watch over the years. My whole career, my 30-year career, I never really had a woman mentor in the fishing industry. I never had a woman. I never reported to a woman, and I never really worked with a lot of women. Now that's so different. Now there's so many more women in the sport and in the fishing business, and I'm so happy to see that.
Yeah, likewise. And I just made a post the other day about the two high school anglers that made the All-American team.
I saw that. Yeah, that's so cool.
So very cool. Things are definitely starting to change, and it's exciting to see that. So
Absolutely, man.
So, all right. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. I know this was quick, and I feel like we could do multiple episodes. And
Well, I'd be happy to come on again sometime. Never hesitate to call me and say, I've got a question for you, because as you can probably see from here, I'm rarely at a loss for words.
Well, that's awesome. And we didn't even get the chance to talk about your art, fishingchickart.com if people want to check that out. So I'll put links to the podcast, to the school.
You're so nice,
and
Angie.
all of
Thank
that.
you so much for doing all of that. That's a lot of work. Anybody out there listening that doesn't realize it, what she's talking about doing is like, oh, I'm just going to throw this together for you. Everything she's doing to do this podcast is a lot of work. But you make it look effortless, and I'm sure nobody realizes how much work it is by listening to you, because you just make it look easy.
Oh, thank you. It is a lot of hours behind the scenes, week after week. I don't know about you, but I'm always like, whoa, how did another week go by already?
Yes, absolutely.
It's crazy. So
yes.
Well, great. Well, thank you again for coming on the show.
Thank you.
And we will definitely stay in touch, and hopefully have you back on sometime.
Let me know if there's anything else I can do to help you, and in any way.
I will. All right, y'all. Wasn't that a treat? I hope you enjoyed that conversation and getting to know Angie Thompson. Please do check out her podcast, the Fishing Business Podcast, and the Fishing Business School, and her artwork, which is so amazing we didn't even get a chance to talk about. But links to all those things are going to be in the show notes for this episode, which you can find on your podcast app or by going to the website, thewomanangler.com/181. That's all for this week. Please stay tuned for next week and all the exciting things to come. It's springtime, the fishing is heating up, and we're having fun. See you next week.